In this podcast episode, Attia speaks with Rhonda Patrick, an esteemed researcher and science communicator, to explore critical topics related to protein intake, muscle health, longevity, creatine supplementation, and sauna use. The dialogue embarks on challenging conventional wisdom about daily protein requirements, delves into the nuanced mechanisms affecting muscle maintenance and aging, and broadens the discussion to encompass the neurological and systemic benefits of creatine and deliberate heat exposure. With Rhonda's extensive experience and insightful commentary, the episode offers a well-rounded, evidence-based exploration of these essential health interventions. The conversation begins with a careful re-examination of the current recommended daily allowance, RDA, for protein, which stands at 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. Rhonda and Peter clarify that this figure is often misinterpreted as optimal, whereas it essentially represents a minimal amount to avoid deficiency, the so-called minimal daily allowance. This misunderstanding has contributed to widespread underconsumption relative to what is truly required for muscle maintenance and overall metabolic health. They delve into the scientific underpinnings of this misjudgment, explaining that much of the historical data to support the RDA derive from nitrogen balance studies, which have inherent methodological flaws, including incomplete urine collection and variable nitrogen-protein ratios in dietary sources. In contrast, more modern stable isotope studies using labeled phenylalanine offer more precise insight. These studies consistently suggest that adults require protein intakes closer to 1-2 grams per kilogram per day to maintain neutral or positive nitrogen balance and avoid muscle catabolism, underscoring the need for revising the RDA upward by approximately 50%. Central to their argument about protein needs is the biological reality that, unlike fats and carbohydrates, amino acids are not stored in a readily accessible form other than within skeletal muscle itself. This means the body has a limited buffering capacity against inadequate protein intake, and any shortfall directly triggers muscle breakdown to liberate amino acids for essential physiological processes. Rhonda and Peter emphasize the dangers of chronic marginal protein intake, especially in older adults who face compounding issues such as anabolic resistance and reduced physical activity. Losing muscle mass is not only a detriment to strength and function, but also elevates frailty risk and general morbidity. This underscores why maintaining sufficient protein intake is critical, not just for athletes, but for the aging population at large, with important implications for preventing disability and poor quality of life in later years. Anabolic resistance, the reduced ability of muscle tissue to respond to anabolic stimuli like amino acids and mechanical loading, is explored as a major challenge, particularly relevant to aging adults. Rhonda explains that as muscle tissue becomes less responsive to the signaling effects of key amino acids like leucine, the amount of protein needed to stimulate muscle protein synthesis effectively doubles in older adults compared to younger individuals. Peter and Rhonda scrutinize the roots of anabolic resistance, identifying physical inactivity as a predominant driver rather than aging itself. Experimental data from leg immobilization studies demonstrate that disuse rapidly induces anabolic resistance, while regular resistance training maintains or restores muscle sensitivity to protein. Thus, engaging in consistent resistance exercise is critical for mitigating anabolic resistance and optimizing muscle health throughout life. The discussion also touches on real-world dietary patterns, revealing that most adults consume protein close to or below the flawed RDA, with women generally consuming slightly less than men. This intake appears insufficient for preserving muscle mass, especially as anabolic resistance develops, raising concerns about widespread hidden negative protein balance. They note that even older adults who marginally meet the RDA likely do not achieve the threshold necessary to maintain muscle mass or prevent frailty. The combination of low protein intake, anabolic resistance, and low adherence to resistance training, with only about 22% of older adults engaging in it regularly, paints a worrying picture for public health that is poorly recognized. This gap between recommended intake and true physiological need suggests a pressing need for updated nutritional guidelines. Moving beyond the minimal threshold, Peter and Rhonda parse out the concept of optimal protein intake, particularly in the context of resistance training. Meta-analyses highlight that increasing protein intake from about 1-2 grams to approximately 1-6 grams per kilogram body weight daily yields significant gains in lean body mass, around 27% more, and muscle strength, about 10% more, beyond training alone. This evidence supports raising daily protein intake not merely for preservation, but for maximizing muscle adaptation and functional capacity in both younger and older adults who exercise. They also cover how intakes beyond 1-6 grams, up to about 20 to 22 grams per kilogram, may provide diminishing but still tangible benefits, particularly for endurance athletes, people in caloric deficit aiming for body recomposition, and those chasing maximal hypertrophic adaptations. Importantly, they illustrate a pragmatic clinical philosophy underpinning the recommendation of aiming for 2 grams per kilogram per day to buffer inevitable daily intake variability and ensure net positive protein balance over time. Addressing common concerns around protein consumption, Peter and Rhonda dissect the perceived links between protein intake, mTOR activation, cancer risk, and aging. They stress that while mTOR inhibition, such as by caloric restriction or rapamycin, has demonstrated lifespan extension in various animal models, the context is complex. They argue that in humans, mTOR signaling in muscle is beneficial, especially when activated through exercise combined with sufficient protein intake, which supports muscle synthesis and health. In contrast, systemic chronic mTOR activation might be detrimental, but the acute, muscle-specific activation induced by exercise and protein is protective and required. They also discuss the limitation of extrapolating rodent data directly to humans, especially since laboratory mice live in highly controlled, low-stress environments, unlike human life, which involves repeated stresses and disuse that increase protein requirements. This nuanced view dispels the simplistic protein is bad for aging narrative and reframes protein's role as critical to longevity by preserving muscle, resilience, and metabolic flexibility. Transitioning to creatine, Rhonda shares her renewed enthusiasm for this well-studied supplement, underscoring its safety and efficacy as one of the most thoroughly researched ergogenic aids available. Traditionally, creatine is credited with enhancing exercise performance by replenishing ATP rapidly in muscle via creatine phosphate, enabling greater training volume and intensity, which secondarily promotes muscle hypertrophy and strength gains. Rhonda's own experience illustrates this benefit alongside her shift from endurance to resistance-focused training. They clarify that creatine supplementation is especially impactful for vegetarians and vegans who have lower baseline dietary intake. The recommended dose of 5 grams daily is sufficient to saturate muscle stores over time without the need for loading phases, which primarily serve rapid saturation and can cause gastrointestinal distress. Peter and Rhonda explore emerging data showing creatine's neuroprotective and cognitive-enhancing properties, particularly under metabolic stress conditions like sleep deprivation, aging, or neurodegenerative disease risk. Unlike muscle, brain creatine uptake appears more rate-limited at lower doses, with recent studies suggesting that doses of around 10 grams per day may be required to significantly elevate cerebral creatine levels and elicit measurable cognitive benefits. Supplementing creatine shows promise in improving processing speed, memory, and resilience to cognitive stressors, though research is at an earlier stage compared to muscle studies. Practical anecdotal experiences suggest higher doses during periods of acute stress, such as jet lag or intense cognitive demand, are well tolerated and perhaps beneficial. The discussion highlights the importance of dosing and contextual stress for realizing both muscle and brain benefits of creatine. Addressing supplement quality and consumer confusion, Rhonda advises that creatine monohydrate remains the most effective and affordable form. She stresses the importance of certification programs like NSF that verify purity and absence of contaminants, recommending such standards over brand names alone. They caution against popular creatine gummies due to low actual creatine content and excessive sugars. Capsules require impractically high pill counts for effective dosing, making powders the most sensible option for dosing flexibility. Furthermore, creatine supplementation is safe and beneficial for children and adolescents engaged in sports, with weight-based dosing guidelines supporting enhanced speed, agility, and recovery without adverse effects. Towards the conclusion, Rhonda and Peter explore therapeutic heat exposure, contrasting dry sauna, infrared sauna, and hot tub use in terms of cardiovascular and neurological benefits. Dry sauna at high temperatures, 175 degrees to 190 degrees Fair, for about 20 minutes induces heat shock protein expression and cardiovascular responses similar to moderate exercise. Infrared sauna offers similar but slower effects due to lower temperatures, requiring longer exposure. They discuss compelling epidemiological data from Finnish cohorts showing regular sauna use is associated with reduced risks of cardiovascular disease and dementia, with frequency and temperature correlating to benefit magnitude. Heat shock proteins provoked by sauna sessions may protect against protein misfolding in neurodegenerative conditions, adding a cellular mechanism to cardiovascular improvements. The conversation turns to practical sauna use, including temperature tolerance, session duration, and the importance of avoiding extremes. Both speakers note that excessively high sauna temperatures approaching 200 degrees Fahrenheit or above may increase risks without added benefit, with head overheating and headaches posing common complaints when sitting on top benches. Rhonda introduces sauna hats as a protective strategy while emphasizing the hormetic nature of heat stress. Too little provides no stimulus, too much can be harmful. Hydration and timing also influence safety and efficacy, with sauna bathing linked to improvements in mental health outcomes, including depression, attributed to changes in core body temperature and inflammatory mediators.